What if the maps we trust are younger than the mistakes they corrected? The parchment smelled of salt when I unrolled it. Old salt, the kind that clings to things that have crossed oceans, survived storms, and outlasted the hands that first traced their edges. This map showed an island where satellites see only water, a river that flowed uphill, a city beneath ice that should not exist. And the more maps I collected, the stranger the pattern became. They were not random errors. They were too precise, too consistent, drawn by different hands, in different centuries, across different continents, yet they all shared one impossible quality. They showed a world that no longer matched the one outside the window. Coastlines that had sunk, mountains that had moved, seas that had drained away, as if the earth itself had been edited, and only these stubborn old charts still remembered the first draft. 15 maps, 15 fragments of a geography we have been taught to dismiss as fantasy or mistake. But what if they were neither? What if they were testimony, records left by people who walked coastlines we now call myths, who sailed seas we insist never existed, who built on land that has since become impossible to reach? The dust still clung to my boots when I first saw them. Maps so wrong they had to be right. And the more I followed their lines, the more one question refused to let go. If the world has changed this much, what else have we forgotten? And what will the next map reveal when the Earth decides to rewrite itself again? In the archives of an old maritime museum, my fingers traced the edge of a map that should not have existed. The parchment smelled of salt and mold, its corners curled from a lifetime at sea, yet the ink was still dark, still deliberate. There, in the middle of an otherwise empty ocean, a cluster of islands sat where no satellite image shows land today. The cartographer had marked them carefully, with notes about fresh water, tall trees, and a dangerous reef. Ships logged landfalls there. Sailors sketched its coastline. But on every modern chart, there is only open water and a warning about nothing more than strong currents. The island had a name. It appeared on Portuguese charts from the 1500s, then Dutch maps from the 1600s, and even British Admiralty records well into the 1800s. Captains described anchoring in its sheltered bays. They wrote about trading with people who lived there, about strange stone pillars arranged along the shore, about fruit trees that grew nowhere else in those latitudes. One logbook mentioned a spring that ran cold even under the tropical sun, its water tasting faintly of metal. Another noted the position of stars at night, using the island's highest peak as a reference point for navigation. Then, gradually, the island began to fade from the records. Ships that went looking for it in the late 1800s returned empty-handed. Search parties found only flat ocean and puzzled silence. By the early 1900s, cartographers began removing it from official maps, marking the coordinates with a note that read, "Existence doubtful." By the mid-20th century, it had vanished entirely, dismissed as a mistake, a mirage, or a case of collective misidentification. But the older maps do not read like errors. They are too consistent, too detailed, too confident in their placement. The longitude and latitude align across multiple sources. The descriptions of terrain match one another, even when written by sailors who never met. And the strangest detail of all, one faint annotation on the margin of a Dutch chart, written in a shaky hand, mentioned a storm of light, not of wind. A phenomenon that appeared 3 nights in a row before the island became, in the sailors' words, difficult to approach, as if the sea itself had grown uncertain. Modern oceanographic surveys of that region show nothing unusual on the seafloor. No sunken landmass, no volcanic seamount, no sudden drop into an abyss. Just a flat, unremarkable stretch of abyssal plain. The depth readings are consistent, the geology is predictable. And yet sailors across 3 centuries insisted they had walked on solid ground there, filled their water casks from its springs, and carved their initials into its trees. So where did it go? Did it sink in some unrecorded cataclysm, leaving no trace even in the sediment? Or was it never a fixed place at all, but something that appeared and disappeared according to rhythms we no longer understand? The more I stared at those old charts, the more I realized the question was not just about one lost island. It was about the nature of the world itself, and whether the maps we trust today are any more permanent than the ones we have already forgotten. And as I rolled up that salt-stained parchment, I could not shake the feeling that somewhere out there, beneath a sky full of stars, that island might still be waiting for the right moment to reappear. But perhaps next time, someone else will need to draw the map, because the old ones have been carefully erased, as if by consensus, as if by fear. The first time I saw the old Jesuit map, it lay beneath a cracked pane of glass in a forgotten monastery library. The ink river on the page ran uphill. It flowed from the lowlands toward the mountains, cutting across contour lines in a way that made every geographer in my memory flinch. According to modern topography, such a river cannot exist. Water does not climb slopes. It does not defy the pull of the earth. Yet beside the impossible course, the mapmaker had written a careful note about boats struggling against a current they did not understand. The map dated from the 1700s, drawn by a missionary who spent decades walking those remote valleys. His other work was meticulous, his measurements of latitude accurate even by today's standards. He was not a fantasist. He was a man who recorded what he saw, and what he saw was a river that should not have been flowing in that direction. In the margins, another hand had added a warning scrawled decades later, that the river changed direction with the seasons, as if obeying a rhythm older than the rocks themselves. I traced the route on satellite imagery, following the valley he had drawn so precisely. The shape was there, unmistakable, carved deep into the landscape. But the water was gone. In its place, a dry riverbed wound through the terrain, littered with smooth stones that spoke of centuries of flow. Strange circular scars marked the valley floor, patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost geometric. Geologists call them potholes, formed by swirling water and grinding sediment. But these were too evenly spaced, too uniformly sized, as if something other than chance had shaped them. Local stories still remember the river, though no one alive today has seen it run. Elders speak of a time when the water moved in ways that defied expectation, when it rose in the dry season and vanished during the rains. They describe rituals performed at specific points along its course, places where the current seemed to pause, to pool, to reverse itself momentarily before continuing on. One account mentioned stones placed in the riverbed by ancestors, stones that hummed when the water flowed over them, stones that have since been removed or buried under silt. When I consulted older records, I found references to magnetic anomalies in that valley. Compasses behaved strangely there, their needles drifting, hesitating, pointing towards something other than true north. Surveys from the 19th century noted unusual mineral deposits, veins of lodestone and iron oxide running beneath the surface, in patterns that mirror the river's vanished course. Could the flow have been influenced not just by gravity, but by something beneath the earth? a pole that worked sideways, upward, against the expected order of things? The Jesuit priest who drew that map left one final note, tucked into the back of his journal. He wrote that the local people believed the river was not water at all, but the breath of the mountain, flowing according to the mountain's needs, not the needs of the valley. He did not dismiss this. Instead, he added that in all his years of observation, he had never seen anything else in nature behave the way that river did. And then, decades after his death, the river stopped. The valley fell silent. The stones dried, and the only proof that it ever ran at all is a map that shows water climbing toward the sky, as if the rules had not yet been written, or as if they were written differently in a time we have chosen to forget. The Atlas arrived wrapped in oiled cloth. Its leather cover burned along one side as if rescued from a fire. It was a polar projection, drawn centuries before humans supposedly set foot in those frozen wastes. At first glance, it was another early attempt at mapping the edge of the world. Then the details emerged. Free of ice, a coastline curled where only blank white should be. Rivers split and braided inland, and on one sheltered bay, someone had drawn the outline of a city, complete with streets and towers and a symbol that meant, in the old navigator's code, an established port. The map bore a date from the early 1600s, yet the coastline it depicted belonged to an era thousands of years older. Modern ice-penetrating radar has confirmed what the map suggested. Beneath kilometers of ice, the contours of that land still exist, buried and frozen, shaped exactly as the ancient cartographer had drawn them. The rivers are there, their valleys carved deep into bedrock. The bay is there, a natural harbor sheltered from the worst of the polar winds. And in the sediment cores pulled from beneath the ice sheet, scientists have found pollen from temperate forests, silt from flowing rivers, and organic material that speaks of a climate far warmer than anything recorded in human history. But the city, that is where the map crosses from geology into mystery. The streets were laid out in a grid, methodical and planned. The towers were marked with careful attention to height and position, as if the mapmaker had walked those streets himself, or copied from someone who had. On occasions, in faded Latin, described a harbor capable of sheltering large vessels, warehouses built of stone, and a central plaza dominated by a structure the text called a lighthouses, though the symbol drawn beside it looked nothing like the lighthouses of Europe. No expedition has ever reached that exact location beneath the ice. The depth is too great, the conditions too hostile, the political will too absent. But satellite surveys have detected anomalies, geometric patterns in the subsurface ice that do not match natural formations, straight lines where there should be chaos, right angles where there should be curves. Skeptics call them compression ridges, tricks of glacial movement. But compression ridges do not form grids, they do not cluster around a central point the way the map insists that city did. The indigenous stories from the nearest inhabitable coastlines remember a time before the ice, though those coasts are still thousands of kilometers from the mapped city. They speak of ancestors who traveled farther than the current world allows, who knew routes across lands now drowned or frozen, who built in places that have since become unreachable. One account, recorded by a 19th century explorer, described a city of stone at the top of the world, where the sun circled the horizon without setting, and where ships arrived from directions that no longer exist. If that city was real, if people lived there when the ice had not yet claimed the land, then the map raises a question more unsettling than its mere existence. Who preserved the memory long enough to pass it down through the ages? How did knowledge of ice-free coasts survive the millennia it took for glaciers to erase them? And what else did those ancient cartographers know about a world we think we discovered for the first time, only to find that someone had already drawn the route, already marked the harbor, already walked streets that now lie buried under ice older than most civilizations we acknowledge? The burned edge of the atlas suggests someone tried to destroy it, but the map survived. And with it, the faint, stubborn insistence that history is longer, stranger, and more layered than we have been willing to admit. The map lay open beneath a yellowed reading lamp, its surface rippling slightly where the parchment had warped with age. It was an early survey of Asia, drawn in delicate ink strokes, the mountain ranges etched like the spine of some sleeping giant. Snowfields were shaded in pale gray, valleys dipped away into soft, careful lines. At first, everything seemed familiar. Then one ridge refused to stay where it belonged. A single peak, named in flowing script, stood in a place that made no sense. According to modern maps, that peak exists. Climbers know it. Satellites have photographed its summit, its glaciers, its serrated ridges. But it does not stand where this old survey insists it should be. Not a small error of a few kilometers. The discrepancy stretches for hundreds of kilometers, as if the mountain had risen from its ancient position and walked across the continent, leaving the earlier maps stranded with an obsolete memory. Curiosity is a quiet but persistent thing. The name of the mountain on the old survey matched the name locals still use, but when those locals point to their sacred summit on a modern map, they gesture far from the coordinates inked on that parchment. It is as if the name itself migrated with the people, while the original location was abandoned and forgotten. Yet, when satellite imagery of the older coordinates is examined, something stirs beneath the veil of time. There, buried in clouds and erosion, lies a broken massif, a mountain range worn low, its highest points little more than ridges. Once, it might have boasted a single towering peak. Geologists speak of uplift and erosion, of plates pushing against each other, of rocks slowly rising and slowly grinding away. Mountains do move, but they do so in ways that stretch comprehension. Millimeters per year, centimeters in a lifetime. They grow and crumble in a rhythm measured in millions of years, not in the handful of centuries that separate this inked survey from our digital atlases. Yet oral histories from nearby valleys contain an echo that does not fit comfortably inside the slow dance of tectonics. Villagers tell of a mountain that retreated after a great disturbance. They do not say the earth swallowed it. They say it stepped back. In one legend, the mountain withdrew from a valley it had watched over, ashamed of something that had taken place there. Fields cracked, rivers changed course. The people who survived followed the mountain spirit to a new horizon, renaming the new peak with the old name to keep the bond unbroken. The story sounds poetic, metaphoric, easily dismissed as myth, except that the old survey marks a great landslide at the foot of the original peak, its area shaded in dark ink, annotated with notes about villages engulfed and roads lost. When modern researchers revisit that forgotten valley, they find slopes scarred by ancient collapses. Entire sections of the range have sheared away in the distant past, leaving chaotic piles of debris that stretch for kilometers. Radiometric dating suggests one especially massive event took place roughly within the span of time between the map's creation and the earliest references to the mountain in its new location. It is as if a large part of the original massif suffered a catastrophic failure, dropping thousands of meters, its proud profile erased in weeks where otherwise it would have taken eons. Could such a disaster, seen through human eyes, have felt like a mountain that fled? Could the loss of a beloved, towering landmark have driven people to seek another summit that resembled it, to rename it, to pretend that the old protector had simply moved rather than died? The old cartographer, unaware of the full violence of geology, drew what he knew. The peak in its first place. The next generation walked under a different skyline and drew the same name in a new spot. History does not easily record landscapes in crisis. The more maps of the region one compares, the stranger the pattern becomes. The mountain's name steps across editions, drifting gradually, like a shadow lengthening at sunset. What began as a single peak becomes a migrating label, anchoring itself finally to the summit climbers use today as a reference point. Yet the first peak still haunts the coordinates of the old survey, reduced, broken, its glory stripped away. It is as if the world itself had participated in an act of forgetting, urging memory to follow the intact mountain rather than linger on the ruin. In that quiet reading room, under the stale scent of paper and binding glue, another thought intrudes. If a mountain can seem to walk across time through the fragile bridge of human perception, what other landmarks might have shifted in our collective imagination, their original homes left behind under new names, under lakes, under cities? And if a fallen mountain can be replaced so smoothly in the stories people tell, what happens when it is not just peaks that move, but entire coasts and seas? The next map waiting on the table seemed ready to answer that question, but not in any way that encouraged sleep. The brittle vellum cracked when unrolled, revealing a coastline that did not quite match the one modern sailors know. It was a map of the Eastern Mediterranean, copied in a medieval script, but the shorelines hugged farther out to sea. Cities that today sit inland appeared as ports. Lowlands that are now seabed were shaded as fertile fields. And in the very center of the map, an elaborate drawing showed a harbor where no land currently rises above the waves. The map had been preserved in a monastery archive, tucked between theological texts and inventories of grain. No one had paid it much attention until a curious researcher noticed the discrepancies. The harbor drawn at the map's center was labeled with a name that appeared in ancient trade records, a place mentioned by merchants and sailors as a hub of commerce. Yet every modern attempt to locate that harbor had failed. Historians assumed the name had been confused, reassigned to another city, or lost to linguistic drift. But this map insisted otherwise. It placed the harbor precisely, with depth markings for the approach, notation of prevailing winds, and even a warning about submerged rocks at the entrance. Under ultraviolet light, faint, erased notes became visible along the margins. The ink had been scraped away, but impressions remained in the vellum. Someone had written about a great rising of the waters, a slow swallowing of roads and farms and temples. The word slow appeared 3 times. Not a sudden flood, not a single catastrophic wave, but a gradual, relentless advance that took generations. The scribe described families retreating inland, stone by stone dismantling homes to rebuild on higher ground. Until even the high ground was no longer high enough. Geological surveys of that same region tell a parallel story, though in the language of sediment and seismic data. drowned river valleys snake across the seafloor, their courses still visible in bathymetric scans. Submerged terraces mark old shorelines where waves once broke against beaches now buried under tens of meters of water. Core samples pulled from the seabed reveal pollen from olive groves, charcoal from cooking fires, and pottery shards from cultures that flourished when the sea stood lower. The evidence is clear. The coastline was different, the land extended farther, and people lived there. But no official historical account suggests that any literate society witnessed and recorded that transformation. The accepted timeline places the major post-glacial sea level rise thousands of years before writing, before organized states, before anyone could have drawn a map accurate enough to matter. Yet this medieval copy, and the older source it must have been traced from, challenges that neat separation. The cartographer had drawn those lost shores with confident practiced strokes, as if copying from something even older, something that had survived the ages through careful replication. One detail on the map is particularly unsettling. A series of small symbols runs along what would have been the old coastline, each one marking a specific distance. The symbols resemble boundary stones or mile markers, suggesting that this was not just a map of memory, but a map of measured, surveyed land. Someone had walked that coast. Someone had taken notes, and someone had cared enough to ensure the knowledge did not vanish with the water. When the map is overlaid onto modern bathymetric data, the match is not perfect, but it is close enough to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. The harbor sits above a submerged depression that sonar reveals as unusually geometric. The fields align with flat, silted plains on the seafloor. The river mouths drawn on the map correspond to drowned valleys that still channel currents beneath the waves. It is as if the medieval scribe had access to a survey conducted when the sea was still retreating from the land, or perhaps when it had only just begun its slow, patient drowning of the world people knew. The thought lingers. If one coastline was mapped before it sank, how many others might exist in forgotten archives, dismissed as errors or fantasies because they no longer align with the present? And what else did those early observers see changing, eroding, vanishing, that we now assume was always the way it is? In a nomad tent at the edge of a restless desert, an elder unfolded a cloth map painted in fading pigments. Where every modern atlas shows only sand, dunes, and rock, her map shimmered with blue. A vast inland sea sprawled across the page, threaded with inlets and dotted with islands. Settlements clung to its banks. Trade routes crossed its waters, but today, that same region is a furnace of wind and dust, its only water hidden deep below the surface. The cloth was old, passed down through generations, its edges frayed and its colors bleeding into one another. Yet the geography was deliberate. The elder's finger traced shorelines with the ease of someone who had memorized every curve, every bay, every river mouth. She spoke of ancestors who fished those waters, who sailed between islands that no longer break the surface, who built homes on shores that are now buried under meters of sand. Her voice carried no doubt. To her, the sea was not a myth. It was a memory preserved in fabric and story, waiting for the world to remember what it had forgotten. Satellite radar tells a version of the same story, though in a language stripped of human warmth. Beneath the desert, buried shorelines emerge in the data. Fossil deltas fan out where rivers once emptied into a body of water that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Ancient lake beds lie compacted under dunes, their sediment layers still holding the chemical signatures of deep water, of algae blooms, of fish and mollusks that thrived in an ecosystem now entirely absent. The sea existed, it was real. But when it vanished, it left behind only whispers in the ground and pigment on cloth. The elder explained that her people do not say the sea dried up. They say it retreated, deliberately, as if drawn away by an unseen hand. The stories describe a time when the water began to pull back from the shore, slowly at first, then faster. Fishermen found their boats stranded farther from the waves each morning. Springs that fed the sea began to fail. Wells dug near the old coastline struck only dry sand. Within a few generations, the sea had withdrawn to a fraction of its former size, and then it was gone entirely, leaving only salt crusts and the bones of boats half buried in what had been the harbor. Geologists point to climate shifts, to the end of wetter periods that fed the sea with rain and runoff. They model evaporation rates and calculate how long it would take for an enclosed body of water to disappear under a relentless sun. The numbers fit, the science is sound, but the oral histories add a layer the models do not capture: the sense of agency, the feeling passed down through the generations that the sea did not simply succumb to heat. It left. It chose to go. One part of the cloth map stands out. Near what would have been the deepest part of the sea, a dark spiral is painted, twisting down into the blue. The elder called it the mouth. She said the ancestors believed the water did not evaporate. It drained into something below, into a place the surface world could not follow. Modern hydrology dismisses such ideas. Water does not vanish into myth. It follows predictable paths, seeping into aquifers, evaporating into the sky, flowing toward the lowest point it can reach. Yet beneath that desert, vast underground reservoirs do exist, ancient water, trapped in porous rock, some of it dating back to when the inland sea still glistened under the sun. Could the sea have drained into those aquifers through some now sealed fracture in the earth? Could a collapse, a shift in the bedrock, have opened a path that allowed the water to sink rather than evaporate? The geology of the region is fractured, unstable, marked by fault lines and subsidence. It is not impossible, just unlikely, just strange enough to make you wonder if the ancestors, watching their world transform, understood something science is only now beginning to consider. The elder rolled up the cloth map carefully, as if it were more fragile than it appeared. She said her people still navigate by it, not across water, but across memory. The old routes are walked in ceremony, following paths that once required boats. The stars her ancestors used to guide, their sails are still named, still honored, even though the journeys they marked are now made on foot through sand. And at night, she said if you listen closely in certain places, you can still hear the sound of waves, as if the sea left an echo behind, a trace too stubborn to fade completely. The Port-o-Land chart from a merchant archive showed a familiar coastline suddenly extending farther into the ocean. A long peninsula, rugged and forested, reached out like a hand, dividing currents and shaping winds. Tiny illustrations marked villages, watchtowers, and beacons along its length. Yet modern coastlines tell a different story. At the coordinates of that peninsular reach, there is only open sea. No shallow banks, no shoals, no suggestion of recently sunken land. The chart dated from the 1400s, drawn by sailors who depended on accuracy for their lives. Portolan charts were not decorative. They were working tools, annotated with compass bearings, distance estimates, and warnings about reefs and storms. The peninsula on this chart was drawn with the same careful attention given to every other coastal feature: Harbors were marked where ships could shelter. Landmarks were noted for navigation. And along the spine of the peninsula, a chain of fire beacons was illustrated, each one positioned to relay signals from one end to the other. Mariners swore by those beacons for centuries. Logbooks from different ships, different decades, described navigating by the fires that burned along that narrow stretch of land. Captains recorded the relief of sighting the first beacon after days at sea, the comfort of knowing they could follow the chain to safe harbor. The beacons were maintained by local communities, lit every night without fail, a tradition that anchored identity and purpose. Then, sometime in the 1600s, the references stopped. Ships no longer mentioned the peninsula. The beacons ceased to appear in logs. And by the 1700s, new charts showed only open water where the old ones had drawn land. Oral histories from the nearest surviving coastline speak of a catastrophe that no one wanted to name directly. Elders refer to the time when the land gave way, when the sea came to claim what had been promised to it. They describe a storm that did not end, a wall of water that marched inland and did not return. Families fled with what they could carry. Villages were abandoned in a single night, and when the survivors looked back, the peninsula was gone, swallowed as if it had never been more than a dream. But if that peninsula truly existed, it left almost no geological trace. Sonar mapping of the seabed at those coordinates reveals a gradual slope into deeper water, smooth and featureless. No underwater cliffs that might mark a sudden collapse. No debris field of tumbled rock and shattered foundations. No submerged ruins where villages should have crumbled into the waves. It is as if the fabric of the world had been edited, and only a stubborn old sea chart still remembered the first draft. One scientific theory suggests localized subsidence, a sinking of land due to tectonic activity or the collapse of underground voids. In rare cases, entire coastal sections can drop below sea level over the course of days or weeks, leaving little evidence on the surface. The region is seismically active. Fault lines crisscross the area. Historical records mention earthquakes during the period when the peninsula vanished from maps. It is plausible, but plausibility does not explain why the subsidence would be so complete, so total, that even the shallow remnants expected from such an event are absent. Another possibility hovers at the edge of consideration: that the peninsula was never as stable as the maps suggested, that it was built on sediment, on shifting layers of loose material deposited by ancient rivers and currents. In such cases, a large enough disturbance could liquefy the ground, allowing entire land masses to slump into the sea and be redistributed across the ocean floor. The process would leave little recognizable structure behind, just a smoothed-over absence where land once stood. The Portolan chart offers one final clue. In the margin beside the peninsula, a small notation warns of ground that trembles. The words are faint, added in a different hand, as if a later user of the chart had felt the need to record something troubling. Ground that trembles. Not an earthquake in the usual sense, but something continuous, something felt underfoot by those who lived there. A vibration, an instability, a warning the land itself was giving, long before it finally let go. The expedition report came bound to an outdated polar map, the paper stiff with age and cold. On the map, the artist had sketched not only ice shelves and glaciers, but stands of trees along one inland plateau. Kopp's symbols clustered where modern science insists nothing taller than lichen can survive. Yet inside the report, sketches showed twisted trunks, hardy conifers, and even something like birch. Core samples taken in our time from that same latitude revealed ancient pollen, seeds, and traces of soil that once supported forests. But the age of those traces did not match the purported date of the expedition had been a minor footnote in the history of polar exploration, launched in the late 1800s by a private sponsor with more ambition than funding. The team consisted of 5 men, a handful of dogs, and a supply cache they hoped would last through a single winter. Their goal was to survey the interior of an ice cap that few had ventured across. What they found, according to the report, defied every expectation they carried with them. Trees growing on ice. Not fossils, not stumps preserved in permafrost, but living wood, green needles, bark that peeled under their knives. The sketches in the report are meticulous. Bark texture, needle arrangement, root systems that seem to anchor directly into the ice itself, as if drawing sustenance from something other than soil. The expedition leader wrote that the trees were small, gnarled, their growth stunted by conditions no forest should endure. Yet they were alive. Birds nested in their branches, moss clung to their trunks, and the air in that grove, he noted, smelled of resin and earth, a scent so out of place that it felt like stepping through a door to another season. When modern researchers revisited the coordinates, they found only ice, deep, ancient ice, compressed over millennia, with no sign of organic intrusion. Core samples pulled from the plateau showed the expected layers: dust, volcanic ash, trapped air bubbles, and buried far below, much farther than the date of the expedition, they found pollen. Evidence of forests, yes, but from an age when the climate was warmer, when glaciers had not yet claimed the land. The timeline did not align. The pollen was too old. The expedition report was too recent. Something was wrong with the sequence. One explanation, favored by skeptics, is that the expedition fabricated the encounter. Polar madness, isolation, the psychological strain of months in a frozen wasteland. Men have hallucinated far stranger things under less extreme conditions, but the sketches are detailed. The botanical descriptions match real species, and the report includes measurements, coordinates, even samples of bark and needles that were supposedly preserved and sent back with a returning sledge team. Those samples, if they ever existed, have since been lost or misplaced in the archives of a museum that no longer keeps detailed records of its acquisitions. Another possibility, quieter and more unsettling, is that the expedition encountered a microclimate, a pocket of warmth sustained by geothermal activity beneath the ice. Such pockets exist. Volcanic heat can create caves, melt channels, even small lakes hidden under kilometers of glacial cover. If a vent or fissure allowed warmth to reach the surface, and if seeds carried by wind or birds found their way to that rare patch of exposed ground, could a forest take root? Could it survive, isolated and improbable, for years or even decades? Geothermal surveys of the region show elevated heat flow in scattered locations, but nothing concentrated enough to sustain surface vegetation. The ice is thick, the cold is absolute, and yet local stories from indigenous peoples who live on the coast, far from the inland plateau, speak of a place where the ice breathes warmth, a sacred site forbidden to approach, where the earth remembers a time before the freeze. Hunters who ventured too close reported strange scents on the wind. It was as if the cartographer had walked through a pocket of misplaced climate, a stray echo of a warmer age that briefly bled into his own. The lines of longitude and latitude matched perfectly. Only the time seemed wrong. Only the season of history itself refused to line up. The expedition leader's final entry in the report is brief and cryptic. He wrote that they left the grove reluctantly, that something about the place felt like a gift they were not meant to keep, and that on their last night camped nearby, the trees sang. Not the wind through branches, he clarified, but something else, a hum, a resonance that came from within the wood itself, as if the forest knew it was borrowed time and was grateful for every moment it had been allowed to stand. In a quiet corner of a private collection, a map of the known world lay sprawled under a pane of glass. Across the Atlantic, where most ancient maps painted only sea monsters and guesswork, this one showed something else. A straight line, a road. Drawn in a faint rust-colored ink, it ran arrow-true from one continent to another, cutting beneath waves that today reach for hundreds of meters down. Along its length were small symbols, as if marking rest stops or stations. The map had no clear provenance. It surfaced in an estate sale, tucked inside a portfolio of navigational charts from the 1700s. The other maps in the collection were unremarkable, standard work from known cartographers. But this one stood apart. The coastlines were accurate for the period. The latitude lines were correctly spaced, yet the transatlantic road made no sense. No culture from that era believed such a thing was possible. No mythology spoke of walking across the ocean floor. And yet, someone had drawn it with the same careful precision given to mountain ranges and river systems. Sonar surveys in parts of the ocean do reveal curious linear arrangements of rock on the seafloor, usually dismissed as natural. Mid-ocean ridges form in straight lines. Volcanic activity creates chains of seamounts. Tectonic processes shape the underwater landscape in ways that can mimic deliberate construction. But the old map traced a route that seemed to anticipate some of those alignments. Not perfectly, not in every case, but enough to make the correlation feel less like coincidence and more like faded memory. One segment of the mapped road runs along what modern bathymetry identifies as a submerged plateau, a flat expanse of seafloor that was once above water during periods of lower sea levels. Geologists confirm that at various points in the deep past, land bridges connected continents that are now separated by ocean. Animals migrated across them. Early humans may have walked routes that are now drowned. But those land bridges existed tens of thousands of years ago, long before anyone could have recorded their paths in ink and parchment. The symbols marking the road are equally puzzling. They resemble cairns, the stacked stone markers used by travelers to mark trails and waypoints. Each one is evenly spaced, suggesting deliberate planning rather than random placement. If the road was real, if it was walked or maintained, then the cairns would have served as guides for those who knew the route. But guides to what? A path across dry land that was already sinking? A memory of a journey taken in ages past and preserved through tradition until someone finally committed it to a map? Legends from both sides of the Atlantic contain fragments that might relate. Stories of ancestors who crossed great waters not by boat, but on foot. Tales of bridges that existed before the flood. Paths that the sea later claimed. Most scholars treat these as metaphor, as cultural memory of migration expressed in mythic terms. But the map does not read like metaphor. It reads like instruction, like something meant to be followed, or at least remembered. One annotation beside the road, written in a script that predates the map's apparent age, mentions stones that do not move. The phrase is cryptic, but it suggests permanence, markers that withstood currents and tides, perhaps because they were large, deeply set, or made of material resistant to erosion. If such stones exist on the ocean floor, they would be difficult to distinguish from natural formations without close examination, and the ocean is vast. The floor is dark. Most of it remains unsurveyed at the resolution needed to identify individual rocks. The collector who owned the map left a note with it, written in shaky handwriting near the end of his life. He claimed to have shown the map to a deep-sea geologist who dismissed it immediately as fantasy. But years later, that same geologist contacted him, asking to see the map again. The collector agreed, but the geologist never arrived for the appointment. When the collector inquired, he learned the man had taken a research voyage into the Atlantic to a location that matched one of the waypoints on the mapped road. The ship returned. The geologist did not. Lost overboard, the official report stated. No body recovered. The map remains in its glass case, its rust-colored road stretching across an ocean that gives up its secrets slowly, reluctantly, and only to those willing to descend into the dark and ask the stones themselves if they remember being walked upon. Among the charts stacked in a forgotten university basement, a faded map of northern lands caught the light from a single dusty window. Instead of the familiar patchwork of lakes and rivers, the center of the continent was dominated by an enormous inland sea. Tributaries fed into it from all directions, and its shores were ringed with settlements, from fishing villages to fortified towns. The ice sheets that once covered that region are well known. The glacial lakes are mapped in papers and models. Yet this inland sea on the map seemed younger, more integrated into active trade routes, as if it had existed in times much closer to written history. The map bore annotations in a northern script, notes about tides and currents, about seasonal changes in water level, about ports that thrived on the exchange of furs, timber, and worked metal. The settlements were named, their positions marked with symbols that indicated size and importance. Some names were familiar, still attached to modern towns, but those towns now sit far from any significant body of water. They are landlocked, surrounded by farmland and forest, their harbors long since filled with sediment or turned into parks where children play on ground that was once lapped by waves. Radiocarbon dates from peat bogs and ancient shorelines do hint at large water bodies lingering longer than expected. When the glaciers retreated at the end of the last ice age, they left behind massive lakes, some of them larger than any that exist today. Most drained quickly, geologically speaking, as ice dams failed and water found paths to the sea. But a few persisted, fed by meltwater and rain, shrinking slowly over millennia. The timeline fits, but only barely. The map suggests a sea that was navigable, populated, economically vital. That requires stability. It requires a body of water that lasted long enough for cultures to build around it, to depend on it, to weave it into the fabric of their identity. The mapmaker annotated the margins with notes about strange tides in this inland sea, tides that seem to respond not to the moon, but to something stirring deep beneath the earth. The notes describe water levels rising and falling in patterns that did not match lunar cycles, that sometimes reversed midday, that occasionally surged without warning, flooding low-lying areas and then retreating as if pulled by an invisible hand. Fishermen learned to read the signs, to sense when the water would rise, but they could not explain the cause. It was simply the way the sea breathed. Modern geophysics offers a possible explanation, though one that feels incomplete. Isostatic rebound. As the weight of glacial ice lifted from the land, the crust slowly rose, a process that continues today at rates measured in millimeters per year. That rising could have altered the basin holding the inland sea, changing its drainage patterns, affecting water flow in ways that might have appeared irregular to those living along its shores. Seismic activity in the region could have added to the instability, triggering subsurface shifts that momentarily altered water distribution, but the notes on the map describe something more rhythmic, more predictable in its unpredictability, as if the sea had a pulse that those who lived with it learned to anticipate. One settlement marked on the map sits at what would have been the deepest point of the inland sea. The symbol beside it is unusual, a spiral surrounded by concentric circles, a design that appears nowhere else on the chart. Beside it, a single word in the old script: listener. Archaeologists have searched the modern coordinates and found traces of habitation, post holes, fire pits, fragments of pottery, but nothing that explains the spiral symbol or the name. Local folklore, however, preserves a memory of a place where people went to hear the voice of the water, a site of pilgrimage or ritual where the sea spoke in tones that resonated through stone and bone. If that site was real, if the inland sea had acoustic properties that allowed sound to travel or resonate in unusual ways, it might explain the legends. Large bodies of water can carry sound across great distances. Underwater geology can create pockets where pressure waves focus or amplify, and human perception, especially in contexts of ritual or expectation, can interpret natural phenomena as communication, as voice, as presence. The mapmaker, recording what was told to him, marked the site without judgment, preserving a detail that meant something to the people who lived there, even if its meaning has since been lost to those who only see dry land where water once stretched to the horizon. In a monastery overlooking a gray northern shore, a monk once traced a coastline that looked eerily familiar, yet utterly wrong. The map that survives bears two coastlines. One is the known shore, matching modern outlines with surprising accuracy. The second is its mirror. Drawn just offshore, like a ghostly echo, it follows a similar but not identical path. Inlets deepen, headlands stretch further, islands multiply. The text labels the second line as the coast of the other world. It is not simply fantasy art. Harbor depths, current directions, and wind patterns are carefully marked relative to both coastlines. The monk who created this map was also a navigator, a man who spent years charting the waters for fishing fleets and trading vessels. His other work is precise, trusted, still referenced in regional maritime archives. Yet here, on this single chart, he drew a second reality layered over the first, as if both existed simultaneously, occupying the same coordinates but separated by something thinner than distance. Today, sonar mapping does show submerged terraces and paleo shorelines off that coast, layers of drowned land that once saw air and perhaps even human feet. During periods of lower sea level, the coastline extended farther out, creating bays and peninsulas that have since been claimed by rising waters. The Monk's Mirror coast aligns, in places, with those submerged features. It is as if he was drawing not fantasy, but memory. A map of the land as it existed before the sea rose, preserved in stories or perhaps in some older chart he had access to. But the monk's annotations suggest something more complex. He describes the Mirror Coast as visible under certain conditions: at dawn, when mist clung to the water; during storms, when lightning illuminated shapes beneath the waves; and on nights when the tide pulled far out, exposing rocks and sandbars that formed patterns too deliberate to be natural. He writes of fishermen who claim to have walked on the other coast during extreme low tides, finding foundations of walls, paved paths, and carved stones that vanished again when the water returned. Modern coastal erosion and tidal action do occasionally reveal archaeological sites, submerged forests, ancient fish traps, even settlements built on land that is now subtidal. These discoveries confirm that people lived and worked in areas now underwater, but the monk's map suggests something different. Not just drowned ruins glimpsed occasionally, but an entire parallel geography that persisted in the awareness of those who sailed and fished those waters, a coast that had not fully let go of its former existence. One passage in the monk's journal, written separately from the map, describes an encounter that shook him. He was rowing alone at dusk when fog descended suddenly, thick and cold. The familiar cliffs of the known coast faded. When the fog thinned, he found himself approaching a shoreline he did not recognize. The headlands were steeper, the beach was wider. And on the strand, figures moved, distant and unclear, as if tending boats or mending nets. He called out, but they did not respond. He rowed closer, and the fog thickened again. When it cleared, he was back in familiar waters, the known coast exactly where it should be. He wrote that he could not be certain if he had glimpsed the past, a vision, or something that existed alongside his own world in a way his senses could not fully grasp. The monk's map offers no resolution. It simply presents both coasts as facts, as realities that those who lived there needed to navigate. He did not erase the older shore. He drew it alongside, as a reminder that the world we see is only one version, that beneath the waves, or in the slant light of a certain hour, other geographies might surface, refusing to be entirely forgotten. The map has been copied over the centuries, always preserving both coastlines, as if cartographers understood that some truths require doubling, layering, the acknowledgement that a single line cannot contain the full shape of what once was and what might still, in some form, remain. The expedition began with a simple inconsistency. An ancient map carved into a stone relief depicted a sacred temple aligned with a very specific star rising over a distant mountain. The inscription gave precise bearings. When plotted onto modern coordinates, the entire alignment pointed to a latitude where no such mountain exists, and no ruins have been found. Yet astronomical calculations show that thousands of years ago, that star would have risen exactly as described, but only if the temple stood far from where archaeologists placed that culture. The stone relief was discovered in a cave system, hidden behind a rockfall that had sealed the chamber for centuries. The carving was weathered but legible, showing a stepped pyramid, a mountain peak, and a constellation marked with careful attention to individual stars. Lines radiated from the temple's apex toward the horizon, intersecting at the point where the star would have appeared. Below the image, a text in an archaic script described the alignment as essential to the temple's purpose. It was not decoration, it was instruction. A map for builders, or perhaps for pilgrims who needed to find the sacred site by following celestial markers. When scholars compared the star positions to known precession models, the dates surprised them. The alignment worked perfectly for an era roughly 6,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries. But the culture credited with building such temples is not believed to have existed at that latitude during that time period. Their known sites cluster hundreds of kilometers to the south, in regions where the described star would have risen at entirely different angles, making the alignment impossible to achieve. Either their world was larger than we give them credit for, or the sky itself was different. Scientists mutter about precession and tiny shifts. The slow wobble of Earth's axis does change which stars appear where over thousands of years. But precession alone does not account for the latitude problem. The mountain and the star would need to align at a specific location, and that location does not match any known settlement or structure associated with the culture. Still, the stone map demands something more daring: that we consider civilizations moving across latitudes in ways our current narratives do not allow, or that there were temples built, abandoned, and forgotten, leaving no trace except in star maps carved into stone. Exploratory surveys of the indicated latitude have turned up little. The region is remote, heavily forested in some areas, swampy in others. Ground-penetrating radar has detected anomalies, geometric patterns buried under soil and vegetation, but nothing conclusive enough to justify a full excavation. Local traditions from indigenous groups in that area do speak of old places, sites their ancestors avoided or revered, locations marked by stones arranged in ways that no longer made sense to those who encountered them later. Some stories mention a place where the ground was different, where certain stones hummed when struck, where the air felt heavier during specific times of the year. These accounts are vague, passed down through generations that no longer live near the sites, but they cluster around the latitude the stone map insists upon. One research team attempted to follow the map's instructions literally. They traveled to the coordinates, set up instruments to track the rising of the specified star, and waited for the alignment described in the ancient text. On the night the calculations predicted, the star rose over a ridgeline that, while not a towering peak, matched the profile carved into the stone. And in the valley below that ridge, thermal imaging revealed subsurface structures, rectangular, symmetrical, buried under meters of accumulated sediment and roots. Funding ran out before excavation could begin. The site remains undisturbed, its secrets held by soil and stone. But the star map persists, carved into rock that has outlasted the temple it describes. It waits for someone willing to dig not just into the ground, but into the assumptions that keep us from seeing how far and how early human ambition might have reached. And as long as the stars continue their ancient dance, the alignment will come around again, marking the spot where something sacred once stood, or perhaps still stands, patient beneath the earth, counting the years until it is found. So maps do not show things that vanished. They show things that arrived. The island that should not have been there came to you first as a sketch in the back of an old sailor's logbook. The pages smelled of tar and tobacco stained with salt and the brown ghosts of spilled coffee. On one of the final entries, the captain had drawn a small chart of a familiar stretch of coast, a route he had sailed dozens of times. His hand was sure, the soundings were precise. Every headland and cove matched modern charts, except for one addition: an island, dead ahead, at a position where his own earlier map and every official chart of his time declared only open sea. The drawing of the island was shaky but careful, as if the captain's hand trembled at what it was recording, but his training would not allow imprecision. He sketched cliffs of black rock on the seaward side, beaches of pale sand facing the mainland, and what looked like a shallow lagoon on the eastern shore. In the margin, he wrote that the surf around the island glowed faintly at night, a strange, steady luminescence that made the waves look alive. He noted the exact coordinates, checked and rechecked with sextant and chronometer. Then, in a different ink, he added a simple line. This land was not here before. When he returned to port, the captain amended his personal chart, adding the island at the recorded position. His log describes reporting the find to the local admiralty office. The clerk on duty dismissed it as an error, a misreading of instruments, a confusion with known reefs. But a copy of the captain's amended map survived, tucked among his effects after his death, showing the island as a solid, unambiguous shape in a sea that was supposed to be empty. Later expeditions went looking. Ships sailed to the given coordinates in clear weather with good visibility and saw nothing but water and sky. Soundings revealed no shallow bank large enough to support an island of the size the captain described. The seafloor dipped steeply there, dropping into deep water that had no business hosting a newborn piece of land. The official response was simple. The island was a mistake, a mirage, a trick of light and tired eyes. The charts remained unchanged. Yet the captain was not the only one to see something there. A whaling vessel a decade later reported a low, dark shape at the horizon in the same sector, which appeared against the wind and current, held its place for an hour, then seemed to sink slowly out of sight. The crew assumed it was an iceberg, but later, reviewing their notes, realized the water temperature was too warm, the latitude too far from known ice. A fishing boat reported breakers where none should be, as if waves were crashing against rock just below the surface. In each case, the anomaly was temporary. When survey ships arrived, the ocean had returned to its usual, inscrutable calm. Modern satellite data adds another layer. Most of the time, the imagery shows only open ocean, featureless, except for patterns of wind and swell. But every so often, in a handful of archived passes, surface readings in that region show something odd. A subtle change in color, a distortion in wave patterns, a patch where the sea behaves as if it is encountering something just beneath, something that disrupts currents and reflects light differently. The anomalies are small, fleeting, and easy to dismiss as instrument noise, processing errors, or passing slicks, but their positions cluster uncomfortably close to the coordinates the old captain recorded. The idea that an island could appear where there was none, linger briefly, then vanish, feels like myth. Yet Earth's crust is not as static as it looks on a map. Volcanic islands do rise from the sea in spectacular eruptions, only to erode and sink back below the waves within years or decades. Submarine volcanoes can build cones that breach the surface, then collapse. But those events leave signatures, ash plumes, discolored water, earthquakes. So far, that region has shown none of the violent signs. One possibility lies in the quieter movements of the seafloor. A landslide on a submarine slope could temporarily raise sections of the bottom, pushing a ridge toward the surface before it slumps again. Gas pockets trapped in sediments could, in theory, create buoyant upheavals of muck and rock that mimic land for a brief deceptive time. These explanations satisfy the rational mind, yet the captain's careful drawing, with its cliffs and beaches and glowing surf, hints at something more structured, more enduring than a passing bulge of mud. The captain's final note about the island is the one that lingers. On his last night anchored nearby, he wrote that the stars above the island's silhouette did not match his charts. Constellations seemed slightly offset, as if seen from a different latitude. The next morning at dawn, he raised anchor to take new bearings, As the light grew, the outline of the island thinned, blurred, and finally dissolved into mist. When the sun cleared the horizon, there was only empty water, calm and indifferent, as if nothing had ever broken its surface. If some places can slip in and out of our world's visible face, appearing in reverse, after the maps say there is nothing there, what does that mean for our sense of certainty? For the comfort we take in coastlines drawn in ink and labeled as permanent? And if an island can visit our sea like a passing thought, cresting from some deeper layer of reality and then sinking again, what else might rise where we least expect it, rewriting charts that we thought were complete? In a climate-controlled room, an archivist placed two maps side by side. One was older, yellowed, drawn with quills and iron gall ink. The other was newer, produced in the early days of printed atlases. Both showed the same coastline, the same rivers, the same mountains. Yet it was the older map that matched modern satellite imagery more closely. The younger one was wrong. Rivers flowed differently. Bays opened where there are none now. Islands existed that today lie underwater. It was as if, moving forward through time, the maps became less accurate, not more. The older map dated from the 1500s, a handcrafted piece created by a solitary cartographer whose other work had been lost. The newer one came from a respected printing house in the 1700s, copied and distributed widely, used by merchants and naval officers across 2 continents. Logic insisted that the later map should be superior. Better instruments, more expeditions, accumulated knowledge refining earlier guesses. But when both were overlaid onto current geographic data, it was the ancient one that aligned. The modern one drifted, as if describing a coast that no longer existed, or perhaps had never existed in the form it claimed. Either the land changed between the two, or one generation of mapmakers deliberately copied something older, something mythic, instead of the reality outside their doors. When geologists compared the patterns, they found hints that the older map captured a coastline before a series of massive landslides and subsidence events. Scarps along the shore matched places where the ancient map showed headlands. Underwater surveys revealed debris fields of collapsed rock in bays that the older chart left empty, and the newer one incorrectly filled with islands. The land had sunk, the rivers had shifted, and yet no historical record describes such a transformation. No chronicles mention earthquakes violent enough to redraw coastlines. No oral traditions preserve the memory of entire sections of shore slumping into the sea. The silence is nearly absolute, as if the catastrophe happened in a gap between generations or was deliberately erased from communal memory. Only this quiet disagreement between 2 pieces of paper hints at something massive, something that reshaped geography and was then forgotten, leaving only the accidental testimony of an older, more accurate map. The newer map's provenance adds to the mystery. The printing house that produced it sourced its information from a collection of charts donated by a merchant guild. Those charts, in turn, were compiled from reports by captains and pilots who sailed those waters regularly. They should have been current. They should have reflected the coast as it was in the 1700s. Instead, they describe a coastline that seems older than the 1500 map, as if drawn from memory of something even more ancient. Rivers that no longer flowed, islands that had already sunk, harbors silted shut or swallowed by the sea. One theory suggests the Merchant Guild was copying from maps handed down through secret channels, maps that depicted not the present, but an idealized past, a coast as it had been in some golden age, preserved in guild archives as a form of nostalgic cartography. Mapmakers, pressured to produce charts quickly for a growing market, might have relied on those older templates without verifying them against actual conditions. The result would be maps that looked authoritative but were decades or centuries out of date. Another possibility is more troubling, that the land itself was unstable during that period, shifting in ways too gradual to trigger alarm, but fast enough to make map-making a race against impermanence. Coastal subsidence can occur slowly, almost imperceptibly, unless someone compares surveys taken years apart. If the 1700 charts captured the coast mid-transformation, they might show features that were already doomed, islands still visible but destined to slip beneath the waves within a generation. The archivist who discovered the discrepancy spent months cross-referencing geological data with both maps. Sediment cores from the seabed offshore showed layers of rapid deposition, evidence of landslides that occurred sometime between the late 1600s and early 1800s. The timing matched the gap between the two maps, but the scale of the events suggested collapses large enough to have been catastrophic, to have been recorded, to have been remembered. Yet the written history of the region is silent. Ships continued to sail, trade continued to flow, and no one, it seems, thought to update the charts until long after the coast had finished changing. The older map, with its careful ink lines and fading pigment, now rests in a protective sleeve, its accuracy a puzzle no one has fully solved. It is as if the cartographer who drew it 500 years ago had access to a vision of the land more true than the one his successors inherited. Or perhaps he simply looked closely, measured carefully, and trusted what he saw, while those who came after trusted what they were told, copying errors and fictions until the real coast was buried under layers of beautiful, confident mistakes. The stone disk did not look like a map at first. It lay half buried in the rubble of a collapsed chamber. Coated in dust, its edges chipped, its surface worn smooth by centuries of falling grit. Only when the light hit it at a low angle did the shallow carvings emerge. Lines, curves, tiny depressions arranged in patterns that resisted easy interpretation. When the disc was lifted and cleaned, the pattern sharpened. Viewed from the side, it was just a circle of rock. Viewed from above, it resembled something uncanny. Rivers coiled like veins across the stone. Mountains clustered like knuckles. Settlements were marked not as little houses seen from ground level, but as shapes suggesting rooftops and courtyards. Roads ran as thin, straight incisions between them, intersecting at hubs that matched the logic of a network, not the perspective of a traveler trudging along the ground. The carver had not stood in a valley and drawn what was in front of them. They had taken on a different vantage point, as if they had seen the land from the sky. When its proportions were compared to modern satellite images, distortions familiar from aerial photography emerged. Foreshortening near the edges, slight stretching along one axis. The rivers on the disk widened in ways that matched how wide rivers appear when viewed from a height, not how wide they feel when you stand on their banks. Someone had intuitively, or consciously, worked with an overhead projection. The ancient carver had depicted the land the way only a bird or something higher could see it. Archaeologists identified several of the carved rivers and peaks by matching their relative positions. The disk did not show the entire world, but it covered a region hundreds of kilometers across, encompassing mountain ranges, basins, and a coastline. Some of the settlements marked on it matched known sites, others did not. A few appeared where modern surveys show nothing but forest or farmland. No ruins, no mounds. No trace of the cities the stone insisted had once existed there. Around the rim of the disk, a sequence of symbols repeated at regular intervals. At first they looked decorative, but when aligned with the cardinal directions, a pattern emerged. The symbols corresponded to angular divisions, like degrees on a compass, though not in the exact numbers used today. It was as if the disk served a dual purpose, a map of territory and a tool for orientation, perhaps to be rotated until a marker lined up with a known mountain or star, allowing the user to read distances and directions from a central point. The stone's material complicated things further. It was carved from a type of volcanic rock not found near the site where it was discovered. The nearest source lay far to the south, across mountain passes and deep valleys. Transporting such a heavy, unwieldy object would have required significant effort and intention. This was not a casual artifact. It was made to matter, to endure, to be consulted again and again by people who valued what it recorded. One inscription on the underside, almost missed at first, added a final layer of unease. It spoke of the disk as one among many, a set, a library of stone maps that, taken together, showed a world more complete than any single view could capture. Each disk, the text implied, represented a different region, all drawn from the same impossible perspective. Of the set, only this one has been found. The rest are missing, lost to looters buried beneath later constructions, or shattered in collapses that turned knowledge back into rubble. If there were indeed multiple disks, they would have formed a kind of ancient atlas, each piece a tile in a mosaic of the earth as seen from above. Who first saw it that way? High mountain climbers looking down from rare summits. Travelers piecing together mental maps from countless journeys. Or something more literal. Balloons, towers taller than any we have yet uncovered. Or vantage points now gone, erased by time and erosion, leaving only their cartographic shadows. As the disk rests now under museum glass, lit from above to emphasize its carved relief, one cannot escape the sense that its maker tried to compress an entire experience of space into that one circle of stone, a world held in the palm of a hand. A perspective humans were not supposed to have until they rode machines into the sky. And if one such artifact survived, hinting at a tradition of seeing from above, what else might still lie hidden in sealed chambers and forgotten cellars, waiting to remind us that our modern view of the Earth from orbit was, perhaps, not the first time someone looked down and decided to draw what they saw. The maps are still spread across the table as the lamp flickers low, each one a question that refuses a simple answer. Each coastline, each river, each impossible road, a reminder that the world has changed more than we care to admit, and that someone long ago was paying attention. 15 maps, 15 fragments of a geography that no longer quite fits the one we navigate today. Islands that vanished, rivers that climbed uphill, cities buried under ice, coastlines drawn before the flood, and through them all, a pattern emerges, not of error, but of memory. The careful, stubborn insistence that what was seen deserves to be recorded, even if future generations will not recognize the landscape described. The dust still clings to these pages. The salt stains have not faded, and in the margins, in the faint annotations and the symbols no one fully understands, there is a voice, the voice of cartographers who knew their work might outlast the lands they charted, who understood that the earth itself is not fixed, that coasts sink and mountains retreat, that forests grow on ice and seas drain into hidden mouths beneath the sand. We call them wrong now, these ancient maps. We point to satellites and sonar and say, "See, there is nothing there." But the maps do not argue. They simply wait. Wait for the moment when someone looks closely enough to see that the errors might be ours. That our certainty about what exists and what does not is built on the assumption that the world has always been as it is now. That nothing significant has changed in the brief span between their ink and our screens. But the world does not stay still. It breathes. It shifts. It remembers. And those who walked its older surfaces, who sailed its different seas, who climbed its relocated peaks, left behind maps as testimony. Not to confuse us, but to warn us that the ground beneath our feet is not as permanent as we pretend. That history is written not just in texts, but in the shape of coasts and the course of rivers. And that if we are not careful, if we stop looking at the old charts with humility instead of dismissal, we might miss the next transformation entirely. Another piece of the puzzle, another secret swallowed by the ages. But I have learned one thing on this path. History does not whisper, it waits. And when the time comes, when the ice melts or the sea retreats or the mountain walks again, the maps will still be here. Patient, accurate in ways we have not yet learned to see. Ready to guide those willing to follow lines drawn by hands that saw a different world, and trusted that someday someone would understand why they bothered to remember it at all. The lamp goes out, the maps remain, and somewhere beneath the surface of things, the next coastline is already beginning to shift.